Okay, welcome to another edition of Real Estate Investor Talk. And with me today, I've got Deon van Zyl. He's the chairman of the Western Cape Property Development Forum. And so the topic that we want to talk about is construction mafia in South Africa. What are the risks? What are the implications for property developers, investors, and also security? And with Deon sort of heading the Western Cape Forum, he's right in touch with the people in construction, with the property developers themselves. And so welcome to you, Deon. It's great having you here.
Thanks, Neil. It's wonderful always to speak to you and to your listeners and your readers.
Wonderful. Thanks, man. Just tell us a little bit about, before we start and delve into the whole construction, tell us a little bit about Western Cape Property Development Forum and sort of the role you play in the industry.
I'm smiling. It's my other job. Neil, the history of the Western Cape Property Development Forum comes from a period when the city originally, right back in 2008, was struggling to engage with the industry during a spatial development framework process. And what became very apparent then was that the industry did not have a regional voice, a collective regional voice. Industry as a totality is very well represented by SAPOA, South African Property Owners Association. But as you know, property happens locally. It doesn't happen in a national sphere. And yes, where there is national legislation that SAPOA looks after, you've got to also have a voice at a local level. And the Western Cape Property Development Forum was established primarily at that point to engage the city of Cape Town on its spatial development framework. But the founders of the organization then already had the view of having a regional voice, i.e. the Western Cape. And so for my sins, I've been chairing the organization since 2011, which has been a long stint, but it's been an incredible journey because it's not just a case of developing a voice, it's also understanding one's own industry. And property and infrastructure development is an incredibly wide set of role players that work together to try and deliver something. And the best way to summarize it, I always say that property development has three main worlds. It's got the commercial world, which includes finance and the associated deal making. It's got a technical world, which consists of built environment professionals and contractors, civil and building contractors, and all the plethora of specialities that sit in that world. And then it's got the legal world, which is basically legislation, regulation, and in bulk dealing with government. And these three worlds are totally separate from each other. They don't necessarily speak to each other. And where those three worlds do overlap, that little spot in the middle, that's called a property developer. And that is where we find ourselves, is to represent these three worlds and to facilitate engagement and discussion. And we're very proud to say that our membership literally ranges from one-man developers up to listed companies, all the way through to professional bodies representing architects, planners, the green environment, QSing, engineering on the technical side, as well as individual members there. We also have Master Builders Association associated with us, SAFSEC representing the civil contractors. So that whole world sits in the technical world. And then also on the legal world, a number of lawyers, and also we lobby and engage government. And our primary principle, our primary goal is to make the Western Cape investment friendly. And you would say to me, but is the Western Cape not the most investment friendly place in the country? And the answer is there's a lot of ruling by auditor. And compliance is an obsession in the Western Cape. And we're not saying one shouldn't comply, but what we say is if you do not understand the commercial and technical worlds, you can be blinded by the legal and policy world. So we're an activist organization. We lobby. Sometimes we use a big stick. We try and do it in a friendly way. But ultimately, our goal is to make sure that the Western Cape receives capital investment, which also includes international investment. And more recently, we have been talking about product Western Cape. Not to say that the rest of the country is not important, incredibly important. but we've got to be clear what product Western Cape is, and that is the current thinking in the organization.
Oh, that's
And yeah,
wonderful.
last time I checked, just under 2,300 members
Yeah,
being
and I think
represented.
what's also very important to add there, Dion, is that you have a very successful annual conference. I think it's in end of April, beginning
Four,
May,
four, four and
and
5 June, 4
yeah,
and
4
5
and
June
5
next year.
June.
Yeah.
Okay, 4 and 5 June. And I encourage anybody because you can see you get a fantastic turnout. It's a really good reception. So you can see people. So you're doing something right, which is fantastic. It's great to see. But let's talk a little bit, let's delve a little bit now into it's quite a big topic at the moment, and it seems to be affecting the economy. And that's a talk around construction mafia. Can you
Yeah.
maybe just give us a definition from, well, first of all, who is the construction? Where are these illicit networks coming from? Where do they emanate from?
So I think it's important to note that it's a loose term that covers a couple of groupings. The history of what we call the construction mafia starts off with the business forums. Um, the procurement legislation for public sector works indicated that 30% local content was required on public sector works. And let's remind ourselves that historically, there's been very little credence to the need to involve local communities in specifically public sector projects, but it's also relevant to private sector projects and on bulk infrastructure projects, education, health, those types of projects. So what we saw a couple of years ago is groupings in the KZN starting to demand participation. And I think the origin is not necessarily a negative. It is important that we as an industry understand that when we fix capital to the ground, the least we can do is to also consider and engage local communities. But thereafter, this whole debate became incredibly opportunistic because groupings started to argue that they should get free carry in projects. They should be allowed to dictate who contractors are, who subconsultants are, and in certain instances, community liaison officers, etc. And it evolved into a very opportunistic debate, and then subsequent to that became criminal because in certain instances, and we see this specifically in the Western Cape, the gangs got involved in the discussion as well. And one of our members mentioned to me that it has now reached the point where if you're working on a public sector project in certain parts of the Western Cape, these groupings arrive with business cards, issuing them to site managers saying, get your employer to phone me, i.e., otherwise you won't continue.
Wow.
So it has evolved into a very specific criminal network. And unfortunately, the bulk of projects that are being impacted by this level of criminality are public sector projects. And public sector projects, by and large, tend to deliver infrastructure. They tend to deliver social infrastructure, clinics, hospitals, libraries, education buildings, and then also housing projects. So what is now happening is a criminal factor is fundamentally preventing public sector from delivering services. Now, if we remind ourselves that the private sector has the ability to move exponentially faster than the public sector, partly because our procurement logic is different, and also, the private sector has a cash or has a profit incentive that drives us. Where compliance is the driving force, where procuring by the book is the driving force, you introduce another level of complexity like this, and projects just grind to a roaring halt. So what we are now seeing is where there are public sector role players that want to deliver projects, they are being prevented. And unfortunately, where people are looking for excuses, this is the best excuse for not being able to do your job either.
Hmm.
And that is negative. But the sad reality is it tends to be the poorest of poor communities that are being impacted, and that is incredibly sad.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what in your opinion, what is the root causes that have allowed the construction mafia to thrive? Because they are thriving. They've got a big impact. And how can it be addressed both at policy and also societal level? I mean, what is being done about them at the moment?
Look, the root cause is entrepreneurship,
Yeah,
albeit political entrepreneurship.
yeah,
There's a sitting
yeah.
duck, but we've got to put it in an economic context. And the
Mm.
best way that I can describe it is when there are only one or two arteries left in the body that's pumping blood. It's incredibly easy to target. If you're a mosquito, you're going to go for that artery, right?
Mm,
And I'm using the term anecdotally now, and it's I'm not trying to disrespect anybody. So,
mm,
so the reality is we're in an incredibly low grow economic situation. Last time I checked, we're running at less than 1%. Um, we have got less than 50% of our construction capacity in this country than we had in 2010, right? So there are
sure.
few projects.
Mm,
The legislation is exponentially more difficult. The procurement process is more difficult. And therefore, the construction industry is a sitting duck. Right? So what's the root cause? Incredibly little economic activity, very few projects, extremely easy to target if you're nefarious or opportunistic in that. How to counter it? Let's let's work ourselves out of this. When the president talks about turning the country into a construction site, I have my opinion about that, and I'll get back to that right now. That is the best way to counter it. Multiple projects, remove the ability to target one or two projects because there is so much going on, and we'll work ourselves out of the problem. That's what happened in the USA post 1930s boom of their mafia, work themselves out of the problem. And that's what we've got to do now, here. Can we do it? Well, when the president talks about turning South Africa into a construction site, he's either misinformed or perhaps naive. It takes you anywhere between 5 and 10 years to produce a public sector project because of the amount of red tape, because of the statutory constraints, because of the compliance culture. We would all love South Africa to be a construction site, but the reality is the government has created so much red tape that not even government can get to a site quickly and efficiently. Add to that
mhm,
construction mafia, and we've got a big problem. So I would put the root cause down to the lack of economic growth. Simple as that.
mm, mhm, mm. So if we start looking what the effects it has on sort of large scale property developers in South Africa, I mean, it's got to affect the financial viability of everything. I mean,
Well, yeah, it does. Look, South Africans. I say unfortunately because it's actually a positive attribute. We are so incredibly resilient that we tend to take these things in our strides. And you would have read in the media about a large development having co-opted one of the local gangs to provide security. We're innovative. If the problem is there, we'll make a plan. But the real danger that we're facing right now, and we have seen this, I've been contacted by a number of foreign investors, and the first question they ask me is construction mafia.
well,
Now, if we are allowing this aspect, this debate, to prevent Forex flowing into the country, then we're all being very, very short-sighted.
mm,
So South African developers, yes, we are being impacted. As I said previously, I think public sector projects are being impacted substantially more than private sector developments right now. It might change in due course if we're seeing less public sector projects taking place because of this. These guys are opportunistic, then they'll target the rest of us. Um, but my fear right now is the messaging. And if international investors are picking up the phone to say, what should we make of this construction mafia thing? Then it's red lights. And this is something that national government should take extremely seriously.
yeah. So, I mean, do you feel there's involvement of political connections in the construction mafia? I mean, it must be impacting transparency and fairness. Surely there is. Do you believe that there's an ulterior sort of political sort of
No,
undertone?
no, I don't. I have no reason to think that there is. What there was in the past was a laissez-faire attitude.
Mm, mm,
And I think what we saw under previous, let's not mention names, but certain national leaders was a general tolerance, perhaps because of the origin of these business groupings. But the
mhm,
reality is where we are now we need to throw the book at it.
Right.
And yeah, and again, let's be fair. There are a lot of people that are desperate for work. And so it's not just the business, the developer or the contractor that's being targeted. It's also the supplier, the artisan, the laborer is also receiving, the other side of this. Who gets to work on a project? If these gangs are placing themselves between supply and demand, then we've got to understand that in the same way that the developer or the contractor is being targeted, the artisan and the laborer is also being targeted. And we've heard horrific stories of people having to pay backhanders to be able to allow to work. So for me, the crisis is real. I think it is finally starting to receive political attention. I think the South African police force has rolled up its sleeves. There is a problem. We've been informed that contractors are not reporting the problem, and that might be because of the historic lack of trust with the South African police force services. We understand that the intelligence services are now involved as well. Business Against Crime is very strongly involved on this topic. So we do urge members and even just general readers and viewers of this podcast, if you're involved, you owe yourself to report your project to the local police office. If you're not happy speaking to the local police office, go to the regional police hub, get your project enrolled. It's not a formal enrollment. Just speak to the guys behind the desk about the fact that the project is coming. Get the emergency call numbers. Again, there are a number. Even the Western Cape Brigadier has made his personal cell number available, and we can share that with you later. I'll get my team to share that information with you.
Mm-hmm.
But you cannot sit and cry in your soup if you haven't done your work up front, which leads me to another topic. And people ask me, what is the solution? The solution starts right at the start when you have the idea of your project. Yes, you're going to go through a 2 or a 3 year rezoning process or environmental impact assessment. Build a relationship with the community where you're going to be building, whether it's a school, whether it's a fast food outlet, whether it's a fuel retail site. Start to talk to the community leaders right up front. Get your ward councillor involved. Join the local discussion groups. If you're working in a township environment, there is bound to be a ward committee there or a street committee. Speak to the people, build a relationship, explain what you're doing, get them co-opted right in the beginning. Speak to your local taxi reps. We find that the taxi industry is getting a very negative message. Every engagement we've had with the taxi associations has been positive. These guys also want the environment to work. They also want law and order to exist. They're not necessarily angels, but guess what? They're on our side of the table. And don't wait until you get to a construction site. If you haven't built a relationship in the 2, 3, or 5 years preceding construction, then unfortunately you're also liable and responsible for the situation. And the other thing is allow your contractor. Think about your contractor and allow your contractor to tie in to your network as well. We tend to give a site to a contractor and expect them to have a perfect world within 4 weeks, site establishment. It's not fair, So we've got to start thinking about the role of a contractor in building skills and building relationships way up front. Now, the obvious problem is, well, if you're tendering for the lowest price, then you've got a problem. If you're negotiating or getting the tenders out earlier, or even having a site establishment tender preceding the rest of your tenders, there are ways and means of dealing with this. But you cannot be naive to think you can just send in your contractor, trucks arrive, and then magically you've got a happy environment. It doesn't work that way.
Well, the good news is there are some construction companies that I know that are working very effectively that actually use local employment. very
Correct.
successfully and have taken that approach that you've said, and very successfully
Yeah.
without any intervention from construction mafia. So I think we're also going to look at the positives as well, that on one side there is some working very well, and on the other side, I
Yeah.
think you've made some really good suggestions.
Neil, just to add to that, we come out of a culture, and we as an industry is partly guilty as well, and that is it's a race to the bottom. It's a race to the cheapest price. We have seen the number of contractors we've seen keeling over because of these types of interferences and them just running out of runway, cash flow, etc. And that gets back to, and this is where I do become extremely critical of the public sector procurement process, right? We expect consultants, engineers, architects, QSs to tender the lowest price. We expect contractors to come in at the lowest price. But when it comes to the appointment of legal representatives, advocates, there's no tender, right? And as somebody said to me one day, well, you don't want a bad advocate. No, well, you don't want a bad structural engineer either,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
we've got to start also engaging with the public sector. This thing of racing to the bottom for the lowest price is not sustainable. And that plays into this whole hand of what we've seen playing out in the construction industry as well, in the construction mafia. So we need a serious public discussion about fair payment for fair service at a reasonable time.
Okay, great. So finally, Dion, just tell us, what role can technology play? Digital platforms, giving transparent procurement processes, even security technologies on construction sites play in mitigating the influence of those kind of mafias and getting the job.
Yeah, well, I think let's start with the procurement process. The fact that whether you're a consultant or a contractor, when you're tendering, need to provide all of your DNA every time you tender is incredibly stupid. I was going to say stupid, let's say short-sighted, right? Where is the public database of contractors? Where is the public database of consultants? Uh, you know, you should only be submitting one document on a tender, and that is your price list. The rest should be public knowledge. Okay, so let's dumb down the procurement process. Let's get that cleaned up. The other aspects is when it comes to, and I've spoken about the need to engage upfront with communities. We in the statutory application process we use public participation. Quite frankly, that's a box ticking exercise. That is not relationship, right? We've got to turn public participation into real knowledge gaining. We've got to build relationship, and that is the missing part at the moment. And then again, I think the you've touched on this. We as developers, and I'm putting on my developer hat now, need to understand that if we are building in communities, we are becoming part of those communities. And it's arrogant to think that you can arrive with a group of people not from that community and be building something and
Mhm.
taking their money in terms of retail takings, or, that's not fair. So,
Yeah.
so we've also got to clean up our show, which then leads, and you've also spoken about this already. We've got to get skills development back. We've got to get contractors able and financed to be able to share skills and do training. At the moment, we don't have those abilities because it's a race to the bottom on price.
Great. It's Deon van Zyl. He's the chairman of the Western Cape Property Development Forum. Thank you very much, Dion, for your opinions. Great chatting to you. Great insights. I encourage everybody to attend the conference. He said it's the 4th and the 5th. Was it the 5th and the 6th of June?
Fourth of
Um,
fourth and fifth of June.
yeah, and it's a really good day, good 2 days actually, in fact, of conferencing where you can network, and more importantly, there's also opportunity to become a member. I'm sure you've helped some of your people that were in need, in particular, if they had issues. Is the Western Cape Property Development Forum play a role in that?
Yeah, I think it's important to note here that we will not tackle symptomatic problems. We only deal with issues where three or more of our members have raised the same issue. And,
Okay.
and the reason why we have that philosophy is we have to build relationship at a political level and with government officials as well. And I find very often that people are trying to solve symptomatic problems at the end of the process. That's not fair, right? So we've got to deal in a responsible manner when we deal with the political and administrative spheres of government. And for that reason, we deal with industry issues and not symptomatic problems. Sometimes they overlap and we try and assist members and we share telephone numbers and we network. But I think it's important to note that our focus is to deal with the industry and not just, I forgot to submit my application on time type of problem.
Okay, excellent. Once again, Deon van Zyl, Chairman, Western Cape Property Development Forum. Great chatting to you today, and thank you for your input.
Neil, thanks a lot, and we also appreciate your support.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Deon.